In September 2011, the Reynolds household was the epitome of a perfect family life. John and Sarah Reynolds had built a life together that many envied. Their home, situated in an upscale Dallas neighborhood, was well maintained, with a manicured lawn and a welcoming atmosphere. They had 2 children, both doing well in school, and were active in the community. Sarah was known for her warmth, always ready to lend a hand or organize neighborhood events. Her best friend, Rachel Miller, was like an extended member of the family. The 2 women had met in college, and their friendship had only grown stronger over the years. They were inseparable, sharing everything from personal secrets to everyday joys. As autumn settled in, the leaves began to turn shades of amber and gold, reflecting the changing seasons. But beneath the surface of the Reynolds' seemingly perfect life, a storm was brewing. John, who had always been dedicated to his work as a real estate agent, began to feel the strain of his responsibilities. The pressure was mounting, and the long hours away from home were taking a toll on him. Sarah noticed that John seemed more distant, his mind often elsewhere, even when he was physically present. She attributed it to the stress of his job and tried to be supportive, never imagining that something much deeper was troubling him. By October 2011, John's need for an escape became more apparent. He found himself growing distant from Sarah, their once strong bond weakening with each passing day. It was during this time that he began to see Rachel in a different light. She was always there, understanding and easy to talk to. What started as innocent conversations over coffee or late-night drinks quickly evolved into something more. John found solace in Rachel's company, a refuge from the stress he felt at home. Their meetings, initially harmless, soon took on a different meaning. They began spending more time together, under the pretense of friendship. But both knew there was an unspoken attraction between them. As November 2011 arrived, the affair between John and Rachel intensified. They became more daring, meeting in places they thought were safe from prying eyes. John would visit Rachel's house under the guise of discussing community events or simply catching up. Sometimes they would escape to a nearby hotel where they could be alone, free from the constraints of their everyday lives. They even took risks by meeting at the Reynolds' home while Sarah was out running errands or attending social gatherings. Sarah remained blissfully unaware of what was happening right under her nose. She trusted her best friend and her husband implicitly, never suspecting the betrayal that was unfolding. Rachel, who had always been independent and content with her life, began to see John as more than just a fling. By December 2011, she had grown possessive of him, wanting more than just stolen moments. She started to drop hints, subtly suggesting that John should leave Sarah and be with her. John, however, was torn. He still loved Sarah and didn't want to hurt her, but his passion for Rachel was overpowering. The affair became a constant source of conflict in his mind. On one hand, he couldn't resist the allure of Rachel, but on the other, he knew that continuing down this path could lead to disaster. As the new year approached, the tension in John and Sarah's marriage became more palpable. By January 2012, Sarah couldn't ignore the changes in John any longer. He was often distracted, his mind seemingly elsewhere, even during family dinners, or when spending time with the children. He began making excuses to stay out late or leave the house early. Sarah's intuition told her that something was wrong. She noticed the small things, how John would avoid eye contact, how he would quickly hide his phone when she entered the room, and how he seemed disinterested in their conversations. Concerned about the state of her marriage, Sarah turned to Rachel for advice, not knowing that Rachel was the cause of her troubles. Rachel played her role well, comforting Sarah and encouraging her to be patient with John. She advised Sarah to give John space to understand that he was under a lot of stress. Sarah, trusting Rachel completely, followed her advice, never realizing that Rachel was continuing the affair behind her back. By February 2012, Sarah's suspicions grew. She started to notice more subtle changes in John's behavior. He became more secretive, taking phone calls in another room and becoming defensive when she asked where he had been. His unexplained absences became more frequent, and he seemed less interested in their relationship. Sarah, who had always been confident in her marriage, began to feel a sense of dread. She wondered if John was hiding something from her, but she couldn't bring herself to confront him directly. Rachel, aware that Sarah might be catching on, tried to distance herself from the couple. She stopped visiting as often and made excuses to avoid Sarah's calls. However, John's dependency on her had grown, and he found it difficult to let go. Despite Rachel's attempts to pull away, they remained entangled in their affair, unable to break free from the web of lies they had created. The once strong bond between Sarah and Rachel began to fray, as unspoken tensions and secrets threatened to unravel everything they had built over the years. The tension in the Reynolds home was palpable, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. Sarah's growing suspicions and John's deepening deception set the stage for what would become a tragic and irreversible series of events. The perfect life that they had worked so hard to maintain was on the brink of collapse, and none of them could foresee the devastating consequences that lay ahead. On the morning of March 1st, 2012, Sarah Reynolds awoke to what she thought would be an ordinary day. She prepared breakfast for her children, exchanged the usual pleasantries with her husband John, and went about her daily routine. As John left for work, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Sarah, noticing that he had forgotten it, picked it up with the intention of bringing it to him later. But before she could put it down, another message notification appeared on the screen. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the sender's name, Rachel Miller. Curiosity and suspicion, which had been gnawing at her for months, compelled Sarah to unlock John's phone. What she found shattered her world. A string of intimate messages between John and Rachel, spanning several months, unfolded before her eyes. Each message was a painful reminder of the trust that had been broken. The words were clear, leaving no room for doubt about the nature of their relationship. Sarah's hands trembled as she read through the exchanges, each one more damning than the last. The realization that her husband, the man she had loved and trusted for so many years, had betrayed her with her closest friend was overwhelming. The betrayal was not just a blow to her marriage, but also a deep wound inflicted by someone she had considered a sister. The room seemed to close in around her as the weight of the discovery bore down on her. Sarah's world had been upended in an instant, leaving her reeling from the shock. Later that day, when John returned home, Sarah confronted him with the evidence. He didn't deny it. The affair was laid bare, and John, with a mix of guilt and desperation, insisted that it was over. He begged for forgiveness, claiming that he had made a terrible mistake. But for Sarah, the damage was done. The words John spoke did little to soothe the pain. She demanded that he cut off all contact with Rachel immediately, leaving no room for compromise. The following days were a blur for Sarah. By March 3rd, 2012, the initial shock had subsided, giving way to a deep sense of betrayal and confusion. Unable to cope with the emotional turmoil alone, she confided in another close friend. This friend, outraged on Sarah's behalf, urged her to leave John, insisting that no marriage could survive such a betrayal. But Sarah, still grappling with the loss of both her husband's fidelity and her friendship with Rachel, wasn't ready to make such a drastic decision. She clung to the hope that their marriage could be salvaged, that perhaps, with time, the wounds could heal. She made the difficult decision to stay and try to work things out, despite the deep scars left by the betrayal. Sarah's first step was to cut Rachel out of her life completely. She stopped answering her calls, deleted her from social media, and avoided places where they might run into each other. For Sarah, this was a necessary act of self-preservation, a way to protect herself from further pain. As the days passed, the situation grew increasingly tense. On March 6, 2012, Rachel, feeling rejected and desperate, decided to confront John directly. She arrived unannounced at his office, her emotions barely contained. The rejection from both John and Sarah had pushed her to the edge, and she was determined to get answers. Rachel pleaded with John to leave Sarah and start a new life with her, believing that they were meant to be together. But John, overwhelmed by the situation at home and the pressure from Sarah to end all contact with Rachel, made it clear that their relationship was a mistake. He told Rachel that he was committed to repairing his marriage and that she needed to move on. Rachel was furious. The man she had risked everything for was now dismissing her, choosing his wife over her after all they had shared. The rejection stung deeply, and Rachel's anger began to fester. She left John's office with a vow to make him pay for humiliating her, her mind swirling with thoughts of revenge. Over the next 2 days, Rachel's behavior became increasingly erratic. On March 8, 2012, she began to stalk John and Sarah, following them wherever they went. She would park her car near their home, watching from a distance, her anger boiling over into obsession. She sent John a series of threatening messages, veiled with anger and desperation. John, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to keep Rachel's actions a secret from Sarah. He didn't want to add to her stress or exacerbate the tension in their home, but the strain was beginning to show. Sarah, sensitive to the changes in John's demeanor, sensed that something was amiss. She noticed how he would glance over his shoulder more often, how he seemed distracted and anxious. The atmosphere in their home became unbearable, thick with unspoken fears and unresolved tension. The situation reached its tragic climax on the night of March 12, 2012. The day had been uneventful, but as night fell, Rachel's obsession took a dangerous turn. Unable to control her emotions any longer, she drove to the Reynolds home under the cover of darkness. It was late, and the neighborhood was quiet, with most houses dark and their occupants asleep. Rachel parked her car a short distance away and walked toward the house. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding with a mix of anger, hurt, and desperation. She had brought a knife with her, concealed in her purse, though even she might not have fully understood the gravity of her intentions at that moment. When Rachel reached the Reynolds home, she knocked on the door, her mind set on confronting John one last time. John, hearing the knock, felt a wave of dread wash over him. He knew who it was and what the confrontation could lead to. Not wanting to alarm Sarah, he quietly stepped outside, closing the door behind him. He confronted Rachel on the front lawn, trying to keep his voice low to avoid waking the neighbors or alerting Sarah. The conversation quickly escalated into an argument. Rachel, driven by a mix of rage and heartbreak, accused John of using her and throwing her away. John, struggling to keep his composure, tried to calm her down, but the situation spiraled out of control. In a fit of uncontrollable anger, Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out the knife. The confrontation turned violent in an instant. Rachel, consumed by her emotions, stabbed John in the chest. John collapsed on the lawn, clutching his chest as blood began to pool beneath him. Rachel, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what she had done, stood frozen for a moment, her mind unable to process the horror before her. Panic set in, and she fled the scene, leaving John to die alone on the front lawn of his home. In the early hours of March 13th, 2012, Sarah awoke to a strange feeling of unease. The house was eerily quiet, but something didn't feel right. She got out of bed and noticed that John wasn't beside her. Concerned, she went downstairs, calling out his name, but there was no answer. It wasn't until she opened the front door that she saw him. John's lifeless body lay on the lawn, his clothes soaked in blood. The sight was too much to comprehend. Sarah's screams echoed through the quiet neighborhood as she frantically called 911. The police arrived quickly, and the scene was immediately treated as a homicide. Detective Karen Alvarez was assigned to the case later that morning. When she arrived at the scene, it was clear to her that this was no random act of violence. The location of the wounds, the way the crime had been carried out, all pointed to someone with a personal motive. Detective Alvarez began her investigation by interviewing Sarah, who was in a state of shock. Sarah, still trying to process the events of the past few hours, told the detective about the affair between John and Rachel. She insisted that she had no idea who else would want to kill John, and her mind kept returning to Rachel. On March 15, 2012, Detective Alvarez turned her attention to Rachel Miller. Rachel became the prime suspect. When questioned, Rachel denied any involvement in John's death. She claimed that she had been home alone on the night of the murder, but her alibi was weak. Her behavior during the interrogation also raised red flags for Detective Alvarez. Rachel was nervous, her answers inconsistent, and she avoided eye contact whenever the detective pressed her on certain details. The investigation continued, with the police gathering evidence to build their case. By March 18, 2012, forensic evidence began to pile up against Rachel. A crucial breakthrough came when a knife with John's blood was found in a dumpster near Rachel's home. It was the same knife that had been used in the murder, and its discovery tied Rachel directly to the crime. Further evidence came in the form of surveillance footage from a nearby security camera. The footage showed Rachel's car leaving the vicinity of the Reynolds house around the time of the murder, further implicating her in John's death. On March 20th, 2012, the calm of the Dallas suburb was shattered when police arrived at Rachel Miller's home to arrest her for the murder of John Reynolds. The neighbors watched in disbelief as the woman they had known for years was led away in handcuffs. Rachel, who had once been the life of every neighborhood gathering, now faced a very different reality. The friendly, charismatic woman who had been a constant presence in the lives of many was now accused of a heinous crime. The community struggled to reconcile the Rachel they knew with the cold facts of the case. People whispered about the scandal, their minds trying to piece together how this tragedy had unfolded right under their noses. The news spread quickly, and the story became the subject of endless speculation. For many, it was hard to believe that someone like Rachel, who had always seemed so vibrant and full of life, could be capable of such violence. In April 2012, Rachel's trial began, drawing even more attention. The courtroom was packed every day with reporters, neighbors, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the drama unfold. The prosecution presented a compelling case, meticulously laying out the events that had led to John Reynolds' death. They argued that Rachel had been driven by jealousy and rejection, emotions that had festered over time until they exploded into a fit of rage on that fateful night. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who had been so consumed by her obsession with John that she lost all sense of reason. Evidence against Rachel was overwhelming. The prosecution presented the knife with John's blood, found near her home, as a crucial piece of evidence. They showed the jury the surveillance footage of Rachel's car near the Reynolds house on the night of the murder. They also revealed the series of threatening messages Rachel had sent to John in the days leading up to his death. Each piece of evidence was like another nail in the coffin, tightening the noose around Rachel. The defense, in a desperate bid to save Rachel, tried to portray her as a victim. They argued that she had been manipulated by John, who had played with her emotions and led her to believe they had a future together. The defense suggested that Rachel's actions were those of a woman pushed to the brink by a man who had used and discarded her. They attempted to evoke sympathy from the jury, hoping to show Rachel in a more favorable light. However, the weight of the evidence made it difficult for the defense to gain any real traction. By April 25, 2012, after days of intense deliberation, the jury finally reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman stood to deliver the decision. Rachel was found guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence was 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The verdict brought a sense of closure to some, but for others, it only deepened the sorrow that had already enveloped the community. Rachel's reaction to the verdict was one of stunned silence. The realization that she would spend the next 25 years of her life behind bars slowly sank in. As she was led out of the courtroom, the vibrant woman who had once been the center of attention at every social event was now a shadow of her former self. The reality of her actions and the consequences that would follow were inescapable. In the weeks that followed, the Reynolds family home, once filled with love and laughter, became a place of unbearable memories for Sarah. The house, with its familiar rooms and cherished belongings, was now a constant reminder of what she had lost. The betrayal by her husband, the tragic end of his life, and the deceit by her closest friend were wounds that refused to heal. By May 2012, Sarah made the difficult decision to sell the house. She packed up her life and moved away with her children, hoping to find some semblance of peace and a chance to rebuild in a place where the shadows of the past wouldn't haunt her every day. The community, too, struggled to move on. The once thriving neighborhood, where everyone knew each other's names and shared in each other's joys, was now fractured by the tragedy that had unfolded. The whispers of gossip that had once been innocent were now tinged with sadness and regret. People spoke of Rachel in hushed tones. The vibrant gatherings that once brought the community together now felt different, tinged with a somber reminder of how quickly life could change. As for Rachel, her new life behind bars was a stark contrast to the freedom and independence she had once known. In 2013, she filed an appeal, hoping for some reduction in her sentence, clinging to a sliver of hope that her life could still take a different course. But the appeal was denied. The courts upheld the original verdict, leaving Rachel to face the reality of her sentence. In the quiet of her cell, Rachel had ample time to reflect on the choices that had led her down such a dark path. The love she once thought was all-consuming had turned into an obsession that ultimately destroyed not only John's life, but her own. The life she had known, filled with friends, social events, and a sense of belonging, was now a distant memory. The prison bars that confined her were as much a prison of her own making as they were a physical reality. But the question that continues to bug everyone is, how desperate could this woman have been to end up murdering the person she claimed to love? It's sad, to be honest. And this isn't the only case of desperation we've seen. The case of the housewife's secret affair with plumber that ends in murder is another serious story of desperation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out that case and other cases on our channel.